Hello, everybody, and welcome to an amazing episode of the Club Lorcana podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jeremy Bertellani. With me, as always, Zan Syed.
Hello, hello.
And today we have an extraordinarily special guest. It's actually somebody that I've been wanting to get on this podcast for pretty much a really long time, the beginning of DLCs. We have Albert Berdellans.
Hey, everybody.
Albert Berdellans, also known as EDM Snob, but probably better known as the head judge for the first few DLCs. Albert, it's great to have you on. I'm so glad that we could get you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited and glad we could finally work out the timing.
The timing, yeah, definitely. And why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself to like our audience? Let them know sort of who you are and like why it's so, like, for us, kind of a big deal that you're on here.
I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. So my name's Albert Berdellans. I was in North America the head judge of the first 3 Disney Lorcana Challenge events, and then I was the tournament organizer for the last 3. I did all of those under PPG as essentially their Disney Lorcana lead. A little bit about me. So I've been into TCGs pretty much my whole life. I think my first TCG was when I was 9 years old with Pokemon and getting badges for the gym leaders and all that, but pretty much been into it since then. I played pretty much every TCG that had any mainstream popularity. From Pokemon, I went to Digimon, I think, and then Yu-Gi-Oh!, and then a long stint in Magic, and many others. Tried lots of Bandai games, but that's me in terms of my TCG involvement from there. And I've been judging really for about 15 of those 20 years off and on. Some of my professional background, I think, that's relevant. I've been in the large event space for virtually my entire professional career. So I started when I was 16 years old handing out flyers for raves. Then when I was in college, I had a nightclub promotion company, eventually bought a nightclub when I was 21 and 3 days old because it takes 3 days to process the liquor license in the state of Florida.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, became involved in producing concerts, selling tickets for concerts and all that. Got bought out of that. Went down to Miami for grad school. While I was in grad school, I started a blog called edmsnob.com. That's
right.
where the Twitter comes from. So Snobby just became kind of a moniker from there, and it has stuck since then. I had a lot of success with the blog pretty quickly, so I was recruited by the large music festival company that's in Miami called Ultra. I worked there for 7 years in charge of marketing, but we were able to scale that from basically one very popular but just one event in Miami, and it became a global brand. By the time I left 7 years later, we had become the largest music festival brand in the world. We were doing 2 million attendees per year, 250 million annual revenue on all 6 inhabited continents. I don't even know how many events a year, but in 26 different countries. And so I got a lot of experience on how events go from there. I learned ticketing and the technology behind events and scheduling and crowd safety and production and all that. So that was a very important time. So that was around October 2019 that I ended that. Around that time, my wife got sick, so the international travel schedule was just not going to work anymore. So from that chapter closing, I went on to work at a company that was one of the largest event companies in Florida and in the southeastern United States. That was right about 6 months before COVID hit. So when COVID hit, I actually got kind of subsumed into the landlord of that company was a major real estate developer in Miami, the largest private landowner actually, named Moishe Mana. I became part of his apparatus, his executive team. So he had a very interesting idea that real estate development could be done via events before building anything. So obviously with my event and marketing experience, it became highly relevant. So I was for 3 years doing that. And then since then, I am now the head of AI for a tech company that is in the fintech space. And, the connection between that is very interesting, but probably beyond the scope of this podcast.
Sure. And, maybe getting back to, first of all, extraordinarily interesting stuff. I had no idea a lot of that stuff about you, especially the early days. It makes sense that there's a lot of event sort of putting on and management experience in your background. The getting back to the scope of this podcast, I wanted to ask you, so Disney Lorcana comes out. How did you get involved with their organized play?
That's a great question, and it relates to kind of the background, right? So I first heard about the game probably when a lot of people did, when there was the initial announcements and then the D23 rollout. I think that was in late 2022 when they released the D23 cards, and they just went super quickly. So I was paying attention from there, but just kind of waiting for news like everybody else. Then as the release started to get closer, the first release was going to be at GenCon, so I just kind of YOLO'd and went to GenCon. And that was my first kind of clue that this game was going to be extremely popular and that the rollout of it was really beyond their capacity to serve it. So you know, anyone who went to that first initial GenCon release, first of all the events that were for sale sold out instantaneously, and people were on the black market selling, you know, slots in those very few events. There really weren't that many. And then the actual release was pretty wild at GenCon. For those that weren't there, what happened was, you know, it was extremely highly anticipated. I got actually to the event hall to wait in line at 3 a.m. and we're all waiting outside of the hall or of the building. And so we finally do get inside the building, and we all kind of run towards the entrance that would be closest to where the Ravensburger booth is supposed to be. And there's all these stanchions set up. So we're like, wow, there's a line and ropes and all that. So we all get in line, and the hall opens, I think, at 10. And we're all in line, and the line keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually goes literally down the block. And there's starting to be some rumblings that, oh, why are you all standing in line, from like some of the staff? And we're like, well, for Lorcana, like that's what this line is for, right? Like there was no other large, you know, popular release that this could possibly have been for. Everyone was in line for Lorcana. It was very clear for everyone that was waiting there what they were waiting for. But around like 9 a.m., it started to become clear that like they neither had the ability nor the plan to actually respect that line. They were just going to do what GenCon always does, which is to throw open the doors at 10 a.m. and good luck. Wow. And that was going to become very dangerous. It was very obvious to everyone there that that was very dangerous, and that if word got out, it was going to be even more dangerous. So at some point around 9 a.m., you know, Ryan Miller comes out, I think a couple times, with their, you know, who was their head of organized play, with him, and they're looking around. They're kind of like, oh gosh, like they do the aw shucks thing, and you know, there was no plan. So what ended up happening, even though they clearly understood it was going to be a problem, they really had no ability to do anything about it. So what happened is we got to just before 10 a.m., maybe 15 minutes before, everyone in the line realizes, hey, this line is not a real thing. And we're like, who brought the stanchions? Like, it was just a mess. And so when the door swung open, people are literally like absolutely crushing towards the entrances, and it was a total fiasco. They're very fortunate that no one got seriously hurt.
I heard about that a lot when it was happening. I heard a lot about like the fake line, and I heard those stories. It's really interesting. As you're telling that story, you know, one can't help but wonder, like, who did put those stanchions there?
It's a mystery to this day.
Right, yeah, we'll just,
you know, and there are lots of things you could have done. But anyway, moving beyond that. So GenCon was what it was. It was very clear from the beginning that like their printing capacity to meet demand was not going to get there. So they obviously were working on that from that point. But the next thing kind of that showed me that there was some work to do was when the rules came out, just after the retail release, which was about a month later. So you had GenCon beginning of August, end of August or beginning of September was the retail release around, I think, September 1st. And everyone's obviously scrambling to every, you know, mass retail place or LGS to try to get any of these cards. But then they released tournament rules and play correction guidelines.
I remember this.
Yeah, you remember when they released it. So as soon as I saw that document, and maybe this is a good time to kind of share one more piece of my background. So as part of my music festival, you know, tours, I would constantly go to a new country and be responsible for like building out the marketing team there and launching that new country. Okay. So I had spent a significant amount of time in Japan, and I needed to learn Japanese for a bunch of reasons, because I had to spend more time there than I thought. So one of the recommendations I got was do something that you already know and understand, and then just do it in Japanese so that you can learn and be involved, and so it's fun and all that. So I got involved in magic judging, actually in Japan. That was my bigger stint in magic judging. So I actually learned their infraction procedure guide, the IPG, and in English, and then tried to keep it translated to Japanese, and I had to do that all the time. So I was extremely familiar with that document. So when the play correction guidelines for Disney Lorcana came out, I took one read at them, and within 10 seconds, I'm like, this is the same document. Like, it is exactly the same document, like word for word. And that really blew my mind, because I'm like, this is a different game. Yeah. Completely. And you know, anyone who's familiar with those documents could see them side by side and do that. But they actually left a piece in there. Like when I say it's copy pasted, it's literally copy pasted.
Copy and paste it. Wow. I remember in that document, didn't they at one point say like, maybe they didn't say creatures, but it was like something similar to that, right?
Yeah, I think I have it here. Here, I actually have. Oh yeah, here. Okay. Here you go. I'm.
No, great. No, we love this.
I have every single copy of whatever. Yeah, look at. I'll give it to Zan. Look under 2.1, hidden information error. Tell me what you see.
All right, under 2.1. Uh,
Maybe at the bottom.
at the bottom, if the scene card was not in an inkwell, shuffle it into random portion of its owner's library.
Library.
What's an owner? What's a library?
Yeah,
The library, a gift for Bell?
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, so this is one of those times where it's like, you know, it's pretty much irrefutable that
Yeah.
that was copy. Like, there's no accidental way to do that. So it's one thing to take inspiration from, but like the literal copy paste is pretty.
Yeah,
and
this
maybe this has to do with the, you know, the fact that the head of organized play, by the time early, you know, spring rolled around the next year, he was gone. I really don't know. It's speculation. But what became clear to me was that two things. First, that really no one inside Ravensburger had any live event experience, large scale event experience, because you just wouldn't do things that way. And two, that they really didn't expect that the game would be as successful as it was. And so they maybe thought they had more time before they had so much attention. So when you, as players, tend to find these kind of scenarios where the rules feel insufficient, this is a lot of the reason why, is because you're using rules from a different game that has a different gameplay design. In Magic, for example, where these came from, you have a concept of priority, where you constantly have to pass back the opportunity for your opponent to do things. In Lorcana, you don't have that. So in Magic, it's a lot harder for you to have these sequences of mistakes that then compound accidentally. You couldn't accidentally have these sequences because you have to pass priority. So failing to do that a few times in a row is not an accident. It just wouldn't happen that way. Whereas in Lorcana, you actually do have these sequences where there's very little involvement from your opponent, and you can have one mistake after another that builds and creates what you would otherwise call an irreparable game state. So that is reason one why it's so difficult to apply like a set of rules for a different game to a new game.
Yeah, no, that seems absurd. Switching from Magic to Lorcana, it's like, yeah, I totally see the way the game is played. It's like you just can't apply the same cookie cutter situation to the other one.
It's even a little worse than that, because it was copy pasted and then basically all the penalties were just downgraded. They just made them more lenient. So when I saw these two things, I saw like, oh my God, they need live event help. And okay, they're just gonna kind of utilize things from other games.
Yeah.
That was when I was like, all right, I need to see how involved I can get in like trying to take this community a different direction, because I really saw that Disney Lorcana had a potential to be different from every other card game.
Yeah.
It had a unique ability to get new people into TCGs. And like, look, I've been in TCGs for better part of my entire adult life, and most of my youth, honestly. They've pretty much all kind of suffered from similar things. The communities get toxic. They're almost overwhelmingly male.
Yeah.
You tend to have kind of just the same group of people that goes from one game to the next.
Yeah.
This was the first time there was a real opportunity for the wider consumer audience that is interested in Disney to be into TCGs. And I'm like, no. We're not going to let this go the same way as the others. My personal mission is that this game is going to have its own unique scene, unique competitive environment, and unique community around that.
Yeah.
So that's when I made it my personal mission to do as much as I could to make that happen.
So one of the first time that you ever caught my attention, it was, I guess, also, to be fair, the first time that I would ever have seen you, it was the players meeting for the DLC in Atlanta. For better or for worse, a lot of the times a players meeting for somebody as experienced as I am is like mostly just noise. You know, in terms of maybe they'll say like how many rounds there'll be, and that's like useful information. For the most part, it's just like noise while we're all sitting down. Yours, I noticed you made a couple different commitments to us that I like actually was like, hey, hold on, guy across from me, like this guy might be saying something or whatever. So that's like sort of when we began to notice that change for you. So yeah, let's get into that.
Well, the first thing I wanted to say was, when I read the rules document way back when, I had a completely different experience. That experience was, oh, this is very similar to Magic, and this is why I want to play the game. So I didn't even think about it from the rule standpoint. So it was one of the reasons why I ended up playing Lorcana. So this is a good and bad thing, right? And then now fast forward, we get to Atlanta. That's the first time I ran into you, and yeah, the thing that shocks me about this is it's rare that there's such a massive problem and they put the right person in in the spot. And as soon as I like met you and saw how you were handling it from top 64 all the way till I lost in Atlanta, which was top 4, I was like, oh my god, this is the best judge I've ever played under. It was like such an incredible experience, and so I felt like at that moment that we were just going to continue to cross paths until now. But yeah, we can move on.
So let's like I guess get to what Zan said is important, right? This is it's rare that the right person ends up in the right spot. We personally sort of believe that you're maybe the guy that fits that description. So was that something? How hard did you have to force yourself onto the head judge position?
I wish that I could say that, forcing it would have worked. I really just kind of had to be in the right place at the right time. And really, honestly, I spent months of effort. It's very kind of you to say that, all those things. I wish I could say it's because I'm just so good as a judge. It really isn't. It's just hundreds, if not thousands of hours dedicated to it. So I started getting involved in, other than just being the Lorcana lead for PPG, I was also the first and so far the only head judge at 20 Lore Pro. I really hope they nominate a new one soon. I was also the head judge for all the large-scale competitive events for Pixelborn, which was later Pixelborn Connect, and a bunch of other things. My first major tournament was the largest tournament ever at the time, which was at Miami TCG-Con under PPG. It was about a 250-person tournament. That was my first experience with, like, real-world, here's how these rules actually affect the gameplay of the game. So, and I judged a bunch of things between then and when it started. So I was, intimately involved with PPG. And when they got the contract, they were starting to tell me, hey, we're going to bring you in and help you be involved. First of all, because of my large-scale event experience, but also because I had been so intimately involved in the rules and the game. I was grinding on Pixelborn that whole time, mostly as a player. When I first started this, I expected to be a collector and maybe a player. It wasn't until I saw this need that I wanted to be a judge. I actually had the first ever master set of the first chapter. So all the cards in both foil and non-foil, including enchanted. I was the first one ever to have that. And actually the Illumineers tweeted it out. It was anonymous at the time, but now I can reveal that was me. So I really, that's where I expected my involvement to stop. It wasn't until I saw just literally a dire need for involvement that I even wanted to be a judge in the first place.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes, like, the best people for the job are the people who like see the calling in, and it's just like you just have the experience and the backing, and just like it just showed. Like, first DLC, I mean, it was a hot mess.
Yeah.
But the thing that afterwards, Jeremy was like, this is a hot mess, and I'm like, that Albert guy is incredible. And then I saw, Chicago improvement. Every event, all the way to Vegas, I was like, every single event was just improving, and I was just like, that guy is the one who, like, every single time we were like, oh, there's so much doubt, like whether DLCs are going to continue, what's going to happen, the future of this game, especially like, I mean, tournament integrity is like, oh my god, it's like, we've all heard about the Wild Wild West situation in Magic, and getting out of that, Magic surviving through that was like a miracle, in my opinion, right? Like, shouldn't people feel so afraid to play a game, and for that much stakes? And Lorcana is just that much more, and I just love this community, and I feel like we have an obligation to protect it.
Yeah, I felt the same way. That's exactly what kind of drove me. Once I did kind of get placed into the position, it became clear that I really needed to make sure that this did not go the same way that other games, or get invaded by other games' players and become like the same kind of culture that other games have. I really took that very seriously. So I kind of started working on a judge manual. But even before that, I had a kind of judge qualification process, because for Atlanta, the tickets they were vaporized.
Yeah.
And scaling them up, that's actually an interesting story about scaling up the DLCs. We can talk about that in a second. But, you know, I had 1,000 applications for judges for Atlanta. And, you know, 20% of them are just, hey, I didn't get a ticket, but I still want to be involved. So, you know, that is what it is. But it was judges from other games.
Mm-hmm.
It was people with no judging experience who were just really into Disney or Lorcana. And I had to come up with, okay, what's the right mix of people, not just for this first event, but for other events? How do I do this, you know? And so I wrote a judge manual that kind of filled in the blanks of being able to take someone from not being a judge, but I'm really into the game and I care, to, okay, now I can plausibly be a judge at one of these events, 0 to that. Or convert someone from, okay, I'm judging in other games, what do I need to know now for this new game? And so that planning process was critical to me. And honestly, I was more focused on the competition. How do I take these 2,000 players and how do I make sure that the person that plays the best or has the best results becomes the winner at the end? And so when we were in Atlanta, my focus and my job was Swiss rounds and then top 64. And then make sure that that goes smoothly. So from my perspective, I'm sitting there on Sunday and I'm thinking everything's going great because I'm keeping it under control. But afterwards, I'm hearing that side events are a mess or whatever. But for those of us who were just actually still in the competition, I thought it went extremely well. But obviously we're a minority compared to those many people.
Right. The two perspectives you heard was Zan at the end of the tournament going, that went great. He made it all the way to top 4. But Sunday, I was kind of like, you know, I was sort of you where at GenCon, I showed up super early. I was in front of the first person I could get in front of. And I was like, you need to tell me how to get into one of these side events. And they were just like, it's going to open up on me. And I was like, that's going to be really bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is where I ended up. So the DLCs, you wrote the judge manual, and when you say that, I guess maybe talk about your strategy for homogenizing all these different groups, and then also we can then lead into like how they sort of scaled up, and as the season progressed, was it easier or harder? Did you get your like core group of people basically that were working with you that you could trust as your like sort of judge captains?
Yeah, kind of. I'm so going back a little bit, you know, as we're planning the first DLCs, there was really nothing. I mean, so first of all, there was this whole 2-game format which came out of left field, right? And that's the other thing, by the way. You have a set of rules where it's like this number of warnings is equal to a game loss under a best of 3 format, and then you literally keep exactly the same thing moving to a 2-game format with literally fewer games.
Yep.
Like, how does that, like, how can that be? And I was also really confused when that came out because I'm like, didn't you design the game to be part of like best 2 out of 3?
Yeah.
Isn't that the way the game was designed? How can you just change that? You know, like, didn't you design a certain amount of variability and swinginess and like first person advantage? Like, aren't these things that you very carefully designed for the last several years to, how can you just change it?
Yeah.
But they did. And honestly, I give them a lot of credit for trying it and going for it. I really have no opinion on whatever. I'm one of those people. It's like, give me the rules, I'll do it.
Sure.
But anyway, so we had to adjust that. And by the way, I came up with this whole program of training judges and teaching them and all this stuff and having it ready for the on-site judge training. And 2 days before the tournament in Atlanta, they drop a brand new document, brand new tournament rules, brand new play correction guidelines. And I'm just like, really? And they refused to tell me one single thing about them until it came out publicly. And so whatever, you know, end of the day, the documents were better. So it was a net positive, but it was very stressful. So we had to make decisions or make recommendations like, how many rounds should it be? What should the top cut be? How should this work out schedule-wise? Like, the fact that we were able to scale them up, I give PPG a ton of credit. It was a miracle. They, just so we're clear on this, Disney Lorcana in North America, would not have been able to do that anywhere close, and I assume it's the same in Europe, without PPG doing it. I mean, in some cases, PPG gave them like dates and venues that were reserved for other games. They just cannibalized it, said, whoop,
Wow.
here you go. You can't just out of thin air quadruple the size of an event. And there's, you know, it's easier with the later part of the season, we could kind of adjust, but at least in the early part, there just wasn't enough time. You see it in Atlanta, there literally weren't enough tables in Atlanta to have enough tables for the event. We had to have these side tables with like the stapled, what a mess. But it was a lot better than, you know, being stuck at 512 people.
As a player, I never ever could tell how the judges felt about best of 2. I couldn't tell that you guys were having, like, I could see the issues, but I couldn't tell that like you guys were just like doing it. Like I was so like after Atlanta, I know some people were like, "Oh my god, what how are they gonna do the rest of these events?" And I was just like, "Oh my god, this is just this is awesome." Like you didn't let me feel that some of the stuff was like weighing on you guys.
It's really important, and it was really important to me that we put out as professional a presentation as possible, because once you've set the tone as like the judges, the staff for the event, the tournament organizer, once you've set that tone, the players take a cue from that. And if you're taking it seriously, they will take it more seriously.
Yeah.
And that was really a very important aspect. I figured, look, I've got a blank slate. There's never been an official one of these before. I've got 20 years of experience of things I've always thought were the right way to do things, and there's relatively nothing in the way. We're just going to do things the right way. So I implemented a brand new way of like Top Cut, the way that works, the whole like sequestration thing where Top Cut is totally isolated and their decks are like taken. And, you know, I tried that out in a couple different tournaments before the DLCs, and it worked out really well. I wrote in the manual a brand new process for appeals. I wrote like from scratch how to do a judge call. You know, I figured if we're going to have a blank slate, there's certain negatives to that, but there are positives too. And Ryan Miller actually had an interview very early on. I don't know how early on, but it was definitely before the DLCs, where he made a comment that I really took to heart. And he said, look, at the end of the day, the community is going to decide the way that this game goes. And maybe he didn't mean for that to be taken so seriously, but I did take it seriously. So I'm just like, okay, we're going to put things in place. Yeah. And to Ravensburger's credit, you know, they didn't really tell me what to do. So on one sense that was terrifying, but on the other hand, it was like, I just told them everything that we were doing. And if there was a problem, they let me know. And that was extremely rare. So they gave us the room to implement things the way that we thought was best. And fortunately it worked out pretty well.
So how was Best of Two presented to you?
Oh, that was just we're going to do this.
You got to figure out how to implement.
Yeah. It specifically came to a head where it was like, we're thinking about doing this. We're probably going to do it. What would you do to the tournament schedule and structure in that scenario? And I don't know if you remember this, but originally it was like there was more bonus points.
Yeah.
It was like a 1-1-3 or something. And then it became 3-3-7.
Yep. So that I feel like the Thea Beastie tournaments had a part to play in that, just because it felt like I played in those and I felt like we were just all in a constant state of draw, like all the players, and basically we were all in a constant state of draw, and it was just going to come down to one round and tiebreakers.
Yeah, it became, look, there were obviously, you know, some things that were very clear about how that was going to go. You know, it was obviously going to lead to some sort of collusion. Yeah. These gentlemen's agreements, things that happen, but their stated goal was really to accomplish two things. First of all, they wanted people to feel live for longer and to play more rounds. So, you know, whether you can argue whether artificially doing that is a good thing or not, but that was their goal, was to get people to do that. And that did get accomplished. That in combination with giving prize tickets got people to play all the Swiss rounds, which I thought was really cool. Because, you know, most other card games, you lose 2 matches, you drop, like you go do other side events, which I have no problem with. Let people go do things. But this was really cool. And then, so it was keeping people involved and making them feel live. Those were like the 2 goals that were stated.
Do you think that that was worth the expense of the amount of draws that ended up happening?
I think the fundamental problem is that you don't feel like you got a resolution from the game. Like you feel like there's no finality. Like no one won, you lost, and then people like have to wrap their head around that. The human brain likes to connect dots. Yeah. It likes to close a chapter. It likes to know, did I win, did I lose? And you can cope with a loss. You can cope with a win. But coping with a draw is like something that the human brain's really bad at doing. Yeah. So, and this, when they tried to get people to be like, no, it's a number of games, you know, that's kind of true, but it kind of isn't, because you have this bonus point of winning whatever. So you had these weird situations where people would say like, oh, I went undefeated and I didn't make top 64. And it's like, no, you split 1-1 like most of your games, and you won 2-0 like a couple. So, you know, it was clear that that was a new thing. And I really respect them for trying something new. I honestly, and not just taking something from a different game. I respect that. And I really don't have an opinion on whether it worked or not.
Yeah.
I think I have a different system. We can talk about this much later in the podcast where I think the future's going. But I think that all in all, they accomplished the 2 goals they said. And it's going to be a wider discussion about whether that was worth it.
Yeah.
The statement of like, oh, it's a set number of games, and then you say, but it's really not. It's also, you're ignoring the physical reality of what's happening. I'm sitting in front of somebody, I roll out my playmat, I introduce myself to them. This happens every match.
Yeah.
And then you know, at the end of that, to like move on, it's like, no, you can't pretend it's just a set number of games. A different thing happens when I get up, go talk to my friends about what happened, go sit down in front of the next person. Like, that's what's happening to the human playing in the tournament. I'm pretty, maybe like passionately against best of 2 in a way that is like, it's been talked about to death, even on this podcast. So I don't want to go into that too much, but I just wanted to add that when you say it's a set number of games, that was like what was told to us, and I was like, they're totally ignoring that. Like, what do you mean we had a lunch break in between them?
Oh man, the lunch break.
Let's talk about the lunch break.
The lunch break. So of the many things that we implemented that were new or unique, you know, we implemented a this rule that I've heard you guys really like, which is once you're sitting down with the player or your opponent, if you both want to get started, you can get started. You don't have to wait for the round time.
That was my favorite thing that you said at the first player meeting. I was legitimately like record scratch moment where I was like, this guy might be a genius, actually.
But it's just like the most common sense thing, and I've never heard a really good argument against it. But I got to tell you, all the Magic judges on staff lost their mind. They lost their mind, and I'm like, and it was a pretty easy thing, but they just couldn't get it. They're like, no, everyone needs to play for exactly the same amount of time. I'm like, why?
Right.
They're like, for tournament integrity. I'm like, look, the top cut rounds are untimed. They have infinite amount of time. If we could give everyone infinite time to finish their match, we would.
Yeah.
So how can you tell me that like giving people more time, if they mutually agree to like use as much time as they can to finish their match, how can you tell me that that's against tournament integrity? And this goes back to my kind of 2 maxims as a judge that I try to follow with everything. Easy to say, but really hard to do. Number 1, gameplay should determine the results of a tournament to the maximum extent possible. That's my like golden rule number 1. Golden rule number 2, players deserve to know in advance the rules under which they will be competing.
Right.
Those are my like 2 golden rules, and I follow those with everything, or I try to. And you know, easy to say, but hard to implement. And this goes to number 1. Gameplay should determine, not the timer, gameplay should determine the results if to the maximum extent that we can allow that to happen.
Probably the strongest argument for best of 2, right, is that we just only have to play 2 games, so we're more likely to finish more matches, and there's going to be fewer draws as a result of the timer.
Yeah, that's one opinion, you know, but you know, I would like to have more gameplay and thus more definitive results. At least that's my personal opinion, but honestly, I'll deal with whatever rules they give me. So going back to what we were talking about, the things that were new, you know, the start when you can kind of thing was new. The way the top cut was done, the sequestration, honestly, that was pretty well received, but I planned that out pretty well in advance. There were a bunch of others, but the lunch break by far was the thing that I got so much pushback on it all the time, and I was just dead set against it, like for it. I was like, we have to do this.
It came from you?
Well, it came from us setting up the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Of how it should be done. And it's like, look, lunch break allows us to like catch up if we're behind in the first half of the day or the first few rounds of the day. It also allows, you know, us to have kind of definitive breakpoints if we need to do things, if we need to move tables around. Because this was originally when it, you know, okay, after 3 rounds, a lot of people are going to drop and we're going to move tables and whatever. So there was a bunch of reasons logistically to do it, but the most important reason to do it is just because not having a lunch break supports this really toxic, bingy gameplay culture that other games like live and die by. They're just like, no, I'm not going to shower, I'm not going to sleep, I'm not going to eat, I'm just going to like pound like, you know, salty snacks and bars and soda and caffeine and whatever else, and I'm just going to binge gameplay all weekend and ignore all other human contact. And cool. But that is, I didn't think, conducive to our game. You know, we're going to have children, we're going to have people with a variety of different physical and mental needs. I just didn't really think that culture was something that we wanted to import from other games. And I thought this was a very obvious and like a tangible way for us to set ourselves apart. And I just added that to the list of ways that we're going to try to set ourselves apart.
So the blank slate seems really important. right? Because I mean, in Magic, the thing that's always said to me, because even though I started when I started playing Magic was 15 years ago, that's not the entirety of the game. So people always just say, "Oh, that's how it's always been done," and so getting to rewrite the script, I think, is incredible. So the thing that's important to me is the new player experience, right? Like
Yeah.
I can't be a good player without the new players, like the ecosystem for new players to be able to love this like ended up loving it, right?
Yeah.
And so, best of two experience, the, the number one thing for me is like I don't want like a new player to play in a tournament where if they make one mistake, they have canceled their shot at top 64. And then the lunch break, I think that is, when I first started, like the first SCG tournament I ever played for Magic, I drew every round because I didn't have the stamina to to play for that long. And
Yeah.
so the lunch break, I think that like if there was a lunch break after round 3, I could have collected myself and come back and started winning or started losing, having more definitive results. And so I just think that I would have loved that when I first started playing, and so like I want to continue the lunch break.
Yeah, me too. I hope it does continue.
Let's move on to another aspect of the judge manual, and this is something that I think that the viewers really going to like because we have like a special segment, and I wanted to talk about appeals. The appeals process, is that something that you authored, basically?
Yeah, so I wrote in the manual, here's how an appeal should be done. And honestly, if I, could kind of take the opportunity to revise it, I would redo it to be more like a second opinion type appeal rather than a strict, like, take the rulings, facts as gospel, and then proceed from there. But frankly, appeals are very rare. At least they were for me for DLCs. They were mostly, honestly, appeals tended to be prevented because if a judge wasn't sure, there was a mechanism for them to go double check. And, we had all of our judge calls at DLCs taken in pairs anyway.
Okay.
We paired everybody up. So really appeals were very rare. But there have been a couple times where there were appeals, a couple times where things, got overturned. I had a couple, but in general, there just wasn't any instructions on how to do appeals. So in my manual, I wrote a lot about a head judge's responsibilities and powers, and then in that, one of them is the right to hear appeals.
And so this is really exciting. Zan, you have an appeal story for us, right? Why don't you talk a little bit about it?
Are we talking about Las Vegas?
We're talking about Aaron Rubin, which I think was in Chicago.
We're going to talk about Aaron Rubin. So Aaron is playing in top 64, and he's playing in top 64. He's playing a blue-red mirror.
Okay. I remember this.
Yeah. So he's playing blue-red. He's playing a blue-red mirror, and basically, I think that they're going into game 2, and Aaron. So he's playing against his opponent. His opponent left his last, like the last hand of game 1, on the side, right? And so basically he shuffled up, presented his deck, drew his cards, and then mulliganed, and then realized that he was missing those cards. And so judge was called, and the fix for that situation was shuffle those cards back in, and you get to keep that hand.
Yeah, I remember this. So this was the one and only time I chose to deviate from the guidelines, and it was pretty crazy. So I remember this. This was in Chicago. So I had a stream judge kind of dedicated to there, and then I had a I was in the main room. So I literally got called on the radio, and it was like a 15-minute walk to go down there. And when I go down there, I think it was actually just one card that was set aside or stuck in the deck. It might have been a few, regardless. But the reason, and it was ruled as a deck error minor, because it's actually interesting the reason why I deviated. So if you look at the play correction guidelines, I have them here, and I'll show you in a second. It has, under the definitions and examples, it says a player has a 59 card constructed deck and the missing card is located inside the deck box. That seemed to fit exactly what we were talking about, and so the result is a warning. But the problem is that under remedy, there's actually no remedy.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't tell you how to fix it. So I'm like, okay, you're appealing. Let me look at the rules. That's like rule number one. You know, let me look
Yeah.
at the rules in front of me and do this. So okay, oh crap, there's no remedy for this in the rules. And so I'm like, all right, significant and exceptional circumstances. I'm deviating from the guidelines because they don't exist.
Yep.
So that seems pretty exceptional. That like under the definitions, this is clearly what it is, but it doesn't tell me how to fix it.
Yep.
So I ruled it as a deck error minor. That's the penalty, but the remedy was going to be a general rule error. So in Lorcana, rewinds are done to the point of the error. The point of the error in this case was under the comprehensive rules. I forget the exact number, but the rule where it says shuffle your deck and draw 7 cards because he presented an illegal deck or he wasn't shuffling his complete deck. That's where the error was. We rewind. In other words, shuffle all the cards together, redo, draw a new hand.
Yep.
That was the remedy I ruled.
Yeah, and so Aaron's appeal was no, like we can't. What do you call it? We can't do this because the cards that were in the blue-red player's hand at the end of game 1 were likely to be higher cost. And so that would make his mulligan situation a lot better, right?
Yeah, well, whether it would be better or worse, it was, clearly an error occurred here. And the idea of just like keeping the same hand that you just drew and the same mulligans, but that you did with an illegal deck, but then just shuffling the extra cards back in, that was the original ruling by the judge, which I understand why they ruled that way because they're trying to follow the book. But that was not clearly sufficient. So go back, shuffle, redo it again.
And that exception was, that exception was great. I think that we figured out, that you figured out the right ruling in that spot. So one of the things I'm like scared of is actually not for myself, right? Like in those situations, and it doesn't even have to do with being a good player. It has to just do with general TCG experience in playing in these high, like intense environments. And so, what is there in place to prevent someone from doing that same exact thing throughout the entire tournament, right? Like, for example, if I'm playing a Diablo deck and I set aside 7 cards that are not Diablo and then do the mulligan and a judge sees, oh, there's nothing there, and the fix is just going to be what the original ruling was. Like, you can imagine that would happen at your local store. You can imagine it happens in all these other spots. And a player that's not me I would argue majority of players wouldn't know that they need to appeal it or the reasoning why. Like, I think the rules are actually really there to protect them, right? Because, that's the part that scares me. It's like, okay, are the people in the later rounds that I'm playing against just people who are doing this over and over again, or are they genuinely there because they got there without doing that stuff,
Yeah, I think this is now the time to kind of talk about the judge manual. So I wrote the judge manual, and it has a bunch of different sections. One of the sections I have this step-by-step how to do a judge call. And, there's all these steps. And then I have 2 kind of supplements to that. Supplement 1 is how to investigate cheating.
Yep.
And supplement 2 is what to do if you made a mistake as a judge.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I published this manual publicly because I'm like, I don't want a secret set of rules that judges are supposed to follow and like no one knows what they are and the public doesn't know. So I'm like, no, I'm really big on transparency. I think sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I believe in building in public. And that makes it a lot harder because you have, every idiot on the internet can now go into Discord and say, oh, I think that this or that. But I do think that it ends up with a better product and a better policy set overall. So it was really important to me to publish it. And it goes to number 2, golden rule, which is players deserve to know the rules that they're competing under. Given the amount of prep that you guys do and how much you put yourselves into it and the fact that you're taking the risk and maybe you lose, maybe you don't, I think that players deserve to have one less variable of the rules being involved. So I'm really like militant about sticking to the rules and people knowing what they are ahead of time. So anyway, in that section on cheating, I talk about how real cheating is rare. I truly believe that as just a percentage. But I also talk about how cheating is inherently self-defeating. Mm-hmm. If you get really good at cheating or you cheat all the time, you're just going to end up in pairings and at later rounds of tournaments that you are not qualified or don't deserve to be in. And you're going to get crushed. I think, in preparing for this podcast, I watched a few episodes of your podcast, and congrats on the audio quality improvement, guys. I
Thank
love
you.
it. So you said, like, at one point you said, I love to play against cheaters. I'm just going to farm them. Like, and that's exactly right. That was my perspective from the beginning, is they're just going to get to the end of people who got there by not cheating, and they're going to be 10 to 15% worse, and they're just going to get wrecked. Because they're just not ready for what they're about to do. And so that's the view I take on it initially. And you still want to enforce cheating, of course, but you kind of have these type 1, type 2 errors, right? Would you rather allow someone who might be cheating to get away with it? Or would you rather falsely accuse someone of cheating and DQ them undeservedly? And I got to tell you, every judge who has judged a certain amount of time has had an experience where you have disqualified someone where you really aren't sure whether you got that right or not. You're
Yeah.
pretty sure, but you have to make a judgment call. And I got to tell you, that sinking feeling that you might have disqualified an innocent person sucks.
Yeah.
So all of that to say, there are a lot of mechanisms in place, or at least that I had in place at the DLCs, to detect cheating. There were, these kind of, we logged everything.
Yeah.
So we had these kind of back channels of, if certain things stacked up to a certain point, certain members of the scorekeeping team were responsible for kind of flagging if someone got a statistically significant number of warnings
Yeah.
that would be outside the bounds. And we got better at this in later tournaments because we knew we had a pattern of like how many warnings or whatever you could expect someone to get. And then we even had deck lists, and we could combine against, we could compare against other people with those deck lists, all that stuff. So anyway, there was a lot of stuff behind the scenes to try to flag and kind of focus judge resources on that. But we always kind of took the tact of, we're going to enforce the rules as they are, which in Lorcana for cheating, it's a high bar.
Yeah.
Intent is a strong thing.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It's like, it feels impossible to prove, to be honest. I will say, as great as it is for me that like a cheater makes it to the top, they can no longer cheat because they got eyes on them now, and I get to beat them because they're not prepared for the situation. As great as that is for me, like the thing that I'm worried about is like the opportunities is taking away from the newer players, right? Because I like to think that, I don't think that I can be one of the best players forever, because I think that the younger generation has more time, and if this environment stays for that long, if Lorcana maybe came when I was like in my teens, right, I could have a longer career in it, right? But I think it's harder to stay on top, right? And so I just want to have an environment where, like, let's say some kid, like oftentimes they have less opportunities to figure out what they are like passionate about and what they're going to devote more time to, and I just want them to have a chance to reach their full potential at a DLC, and I'm playing against that person rather than this person who got there by bending the rules.
Yeah, so I totally agree. We did as much as we could about that. Ultimately, it's a big tournament. You only have so many eyes and whatever. But part of judge training was about spotting those sorts of moments and just kind of paying a little extra attention. And, I would assign kind of judges to quadrants on the floor, and I would encourage them all to, in fact, they were required to kind of walk around and go whatever. If you've ever been in a tournament where I'm judging, in round 1, I will literally assign a set of tables to each judge and have them go around and confirm, like, okay, what's your name? What's your name? Like, literally confirm that they know all the people. That really does two things. First of all, to make sure everyone knows where they're sitting, but also to familiarize yourself with your quadrant and the players in it. We did a lot of things, as much as we could, to be deterrents against cheating. Mm-hmm. We had a lot, because that's really the key. You want to deter people from even trying it.
Yeah.
And ultimately you want to be, scare those people off or get them out of the game. And we certainly took action when we needed to. But one of the things that I don't think a lot of people know about is we had a specific tournament integrity team, not only to, protect against cheaters, but to protect against staff misconduct or conflict of interest and whatever. And I didn't publicize this at the time. This might be the first time I've actually said anything about it. But for example, our tournament integrity team, we had undercover players out on the floor, randomly assigned to certain tables that we were able to kind of set aside. So you might have been sitting next to a match that was not really being played, or being played with the intention of those individuals who are actually undercover kind of staff members, listening in and just keeping an eye on other things. And we had also undercover judges who weren't really judges, but were also just watching other judges.
Yeah.
And that was their job.
I can't believe that you're like straight facing this, and like there's a part of me that wants to be like, you had what, dog? Undercover player? Do you mean the match next to me? Like, oh my god, what did their decks look like? How did we even determine that? But also,
They had starter decks usually.
Nice.
then you'd think that I would be able to notice that the people next to me are playing like the 6-mana Mufasa that's blue or whatever. But you'd think that I would have noticed that. So I mean, I feel like we can go through so many places. I guess that I feel good as a player about that because it's a commitment to, tournament integrity. And so that's great. I guess, a similar question. I'm just really incredulous about the undercover players thing. It's really like taking me.
Is that really surprising? I mean, that's
No, it's not.
it's something that once I explained it to people, they were like, "Oh, that's great." And we had the advantage. I know you weren't a fan of this, but like we had empty seats anyway because early on the decision was made not to try to sell the last minute spots that were empty. That decision, by the way, just so we're clear, that decision was made for a couple different reasons. First of all, it was going to delay like the start always with like we really didn't have good mechanisms to swap people in and out and all that. We really needed to drop people and then go. But also because we did not want to encourage a large number of people with no tickets to try to come to the events trying to get in.
Yeah.
Security risk, safety risk. I come from the music festival world. And I thought that the more demand, the better. I want huge lines. I want people who can't get in. I want the FOMO. And I thought I was really cool about that until, this was in 2013. I got to the point where it was Swedish House Mafia's last show ever, and we publicized it, and they were breaking up, and that was it. And people were so enamored and trying to get in, they were actually jumping the fence and whatever. And I thought it was so cool because I hyped it up that much.
Yeah.
The next year, same thing happens, except this time, the place that they were climbing the fence, too many people were climbing it, and there was like a mesh on the fence, so you couldn't see what was on the other side. They were climbing it, and it toppled over right on top of a security guard that was on the other side of the fence. Cracked her skull, nearly killed that security guard.
Oh my god.
And I have to live with that. The fact that, I felt good about creating all this hype, and real people got hurt.
Yeah.
Just so that I could, like, on my next performance review, put an extra couple KPIs. And I don't wish that on anybody. And so we have had similar crowds with this game, and by the grace of God only, our crowds are better behaved, and no one has gotten hurt, but easily they could have. I saw people at GenCon, I saw wheelchairs getting toppled. I saw people shoved into walls. I mean, I saw situations where people really could have gotten hurt. And so we did not want to have just this infinite pool of people trying to get in, because it might be fine if just you show up. But what happens when you and 400 of your closest friends and all the scalpers in that city decide that they want to come in because they're trying to resell the promos or God knows what else? So that's why that decision was made.
I had planned, so just so everybody knows where I'm coming from. I went to Chicago on basically the speculation of, I was like, well, I'm just going to try to get in. I didn't have a ticket. Yeah. Ticket sold out right from under me. I tried to get a ticket at the allotted time. So first of all, I'm pretty conscious of what you're talking about, which is why I like made sure that I was like, if I only after the fact that I went to Chicago did I like tell people that I was going on a spec, because if I had gotten in, I was like resolved to be like, I'm never telling anybody that I like got into the tournament. That could be really bad, I didn't get in, which was really shocking to me at the time because I didn't know, I guess, what your whole deal was, right? I didn't know what I was up against. And I just figured, I'm pretty undefeated in my lifetime of like showing up to an event and, whatever. I shrug my shoulders, shake hands with the security guards, make friends. And at the end of it, I'm in the event or whatever. It's like not something that's like, it's something I've done before. So I was surprised when I didn't get it. I wasn't very upset because I didn't have a ticket, and that's just like the way that things should go. I was maybe that day kind of like, this is so dumb, just let me play, because I could see the empty seats. But it's probably for the best that most people can't try to get that last minute tickets, especially given how popular the Lorcana DLCs were. So that's all. That's like, what we're talking about.
Before we left, I mean, I got into the tournament normally, but I will say that before we left, we actually just felt happy that you did that. We were like we were just like, oh, we've never seen that at a Magic tournament. We've never seen that at, we just felt like we could, like, the rules were lax enough, and there was like, not like, I don't know. I felt good about it.
Yeah. You both were pretty well connected. So like at another scenario, you might have been able to do it. But I just, from the beginning, I took a very clear stance, and this goes back to like wanting the game to be different, that the rules are going to apply equally to everybody. Like we're not going to, if we say we're going to do it like this, and we're not going to allow this, and we're not going to make exceptions, then we're going to stick to that. And for better or worse, like we're going to do it. And so it was set up so that if anyone wanted to ask, it was structured so that that would come to me.
It did go.
And
to
so
you.
there were all these fail safes in place where it was impossible for anyone to break the rules in a way that they could do on their own.
Yeah.
Everyone had to have someone else's collaboration in a way that would break the rules, and I would eventually know. So it was those systems were put in place for exactly that reason,
which was cool.
Yeah, and in Chicago, I have some rules for myself. If I'm trying to do something like that, I'm not gonna trespass, and I'm not gonna lie to anybody, or
I don't blame you for trying, and you were very upset, and I really am sorry for that. But
it's okay. I mean, it happens.
You handled it, I thought, very respectfully.
Once it was clear that it was like time for me to leave, I left, and that's. I'm trying to follow the rules.
You shouldn't have even been able to get in the room, which was impressive to me at the time.
Like I said, you make friends with a security guard. You ask them if how long they've been on shift or whatever, and by the end of it, you're on the other side of them. And who even knows how that happened? I've done that a lot in my life, and a lot of my viewers are the same way. There's like certainly a difference in the type of person that's like a really big that comes up to me and's like, Jeremy, I love what you do, and that comes up to Zan's like, Zan, I love what you do. There's like a type of person that fights, tries to get into it or whatever.
Brother, I've seen so much of that. I've seen ways that people try to get into things they're not supposed to get into. You wouldn't even believe. We had people scuba like with a snorkel mask through Biscayne Bay onto where the park that Ultra's on is on Biscayne Bay. It's on the water, so they like came in the back, but we like structured it so that it was all back of house against the water and the rocks, and it was crazy. The stuff I've seen would blow your mind. And I've got in my like toolbox, if I ever need to get into things, I've got like 3 or 4 like completely foolproof ways to do it. So I was actually disappointed that more people like you didn't show up so that we could like show off our security measures. But in a way, I'm very grateful too.
I'm never gonna try to the scuba thing would have been a little advanced to me. A lot of those things are just like not what I'm willing to do because I care about the game and I don't want to hurt anybody. So that's going on. But yeah, when you said that just then, I have a little kindred spirit with those scuba divers. And actually, the fact that they're scuba diving doesn't blow my mind because people, when there's a will, that's the way they're trying to get in.
Well,
the fact that you accounted for it is freaking me out.
Well, look, the core problem is that there was just more demand than the events could satisfy. Like more people wanted tickets than could get tickets. We had somewhere around 30,000 people trying to get tickets for Atlanta. When it was the initial 500.
Yeah.
Right.
And we all knew it was going to vaporize. To Ravensburger's credit, at least, the relatively junior people we were dealing with that then had to deal with their executives, they all knew the tickets were going to vaporize too. They just needed to literally have the vaporization take place so that then they could take that data back to their executives and get it approved and whatever. But that was even in March. I mean, even in March, they're like, I'm not sure if it's going to be like this big. I'm like, okay, if you don't have enough data by now to know that this game is hugely in demand and that you need to account for it, then I don't know what other data I can give you that's going to do it. And then we're in the position where, okay, now it's March. How do we quadruple all these events happening in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? And you can't just do that. When I was in music festivals, we planned each festival 2 years in advance.
Right.
Because there's things that you can't just whip up out of thin air. Things like venues. They're not just sitting around waiting for you to rent them. Like they're trying to rent them out to people. And those events are planned in advance. And, equipment, staffing, logistics, all of that stuff is not trivial. And so, when you've been in that business for a long enough time, you realize that you can throw money at a problem to make up for the fact that you were late planning, but that only works to a point.
Yeah.
There's a point where like money can't buy your time back, and there's no time machine you can purchase. So, scaling up these events, we tried as much as we can, but I think in the future, the solution to this is just have more events, have them more frequently, have a wider availability.
All right, I have 2 questions. First question is, what do you think of the bring a ladder sneak into an event situation. Like if you bring a ladder to a place, they'll just let you in because they think you're doing something.
That's pretty good. I have a better one.
Okay.
For me, it's bags of ice.
Oh,
Oh yeah.
Wear black, carry a bag of ice in each hand, just walk in.
wow.
Like no one's ever going to stop someone with because a ladder is not like a time sensitive thing. You need a time sensitive thing. Like
Yeah.
it's dripping, you got the eye, like it's
Wow.
perfect. Yeah, that's like the one that's
That's definitely a good one for a club.
and you could get ice anywhere. I mean, you just go to the gas station,
Yeah, yeah.
anything, because you could just
Really?
find an excuse. Oh, I'm walking in for ice with whatever. The security guard has no
Interesting.
idea where ice is supposed to go.
Yeah.
Well, if the ice doesn't work, what I have in my car is I drove for Amazon for 2 years, so I got that uniform.
That's good.
That uniform will get you into the White House.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good one.
But we shouldn't. What are we doing? We're outside of the scope. Your second question.
All right. Second question is, in this drought of DLCs, there have been a lot of events.
Yeah.
One thing that was surprising to me, like I thought that these DLCs are being judged fairly well.
Yeah.
And I thought that they would like serve as basically like the Supreme Court rulings, and
Yeah.
would pass on to these events. And besides the SSG event that I went to where you were judging,
Yeah.
I just felt like it was just honestly chaos.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we're going to talk about, I guess, in a later segment. When we talk about like a judge program proposal, but there's just not really good incentives to be a judge. I mean, even at the LGS level, you get paid, what, like a Nutter Butter and like 3 packs or something. Like it's just ridiculous. LGSs aren't or don't feel the need to bear the expense. The players really have no ability to like dictate or mandate or whatever. And more importantly than that, there's really no way for you to know as players who's a good judge and who isn't. Like, yeah, they've judged DLCs, like that's one kind of mechanism, but there's some variability in quality there. And even so, there's plenty of excellent judges who haven't judged any DLCs. And even DLCs were very kind of haphazard in terms of like making it worth it. The pay's not great, pretty minimal, and especially if it's something you're traveling for, there's a fundamental mechanism of incentives that's missing.
Yeah.
If you are skilled enough, when I was grinding on Pixelborn, I was in the top 25. I could have been a player. I could have taken that route, and I just am a zealot for like making this game what it is. But absent that, it would make a way more sense. Like the ROI on being a player is just much better. You can win golden Mickeys and enchanted cards and this and that. Whereas as a judge, like lunch is paid for. You might get a shirt. In fact, at Continentals, they had to give the shirts back.
Oh my God.
They didn't even get to keep neither the Europeans nor North America. Like they actually had that stuff that's like inexcusable to me.
Yeah.
And I will really try to avoid dunking on Ravensburger because they've done almost everything very well.
Yeah.
Like everything except for organized play is excellent. Game design. They made an incredible game. Most games, no one ever cares. And that's how they die. 99% of the games, that's how they go. So they made a game where everyone cares. They're dealing with Disney, which is not easy. They're creating these interesting sets. They're creating good mechanics. The art is beautiful. Like they've got all, like 90, I feel bad for the 98% of the Ravensburger employees that are killing it. A+. That just this one most obvious, really in-your-face thing is was not planned for, and is one of those things that cannot just be whipped up. And now we're at the point where, the first head of organized play was gone by March of 2024. Then only a few weeks later, a junior person who was supposed to report to that person and be under them started, and they started 6 weeks before DLC Atlanta was supposed to start. Like, what were they going to do? And now that person's gone as of like 2 weeks ago. So the turnover is brutal. Those skills are really rare. COVID decimated the event industry. So like the combination of skills required to be like an organized play lead at these events, I don't think they've hired the director of player events yet that they've been advertising for. I don't think they found a good candidate yet.
Why can't it just be you?
Well, so anyway, I wanted to, like, you said you wanted to talk about the judge program at a later point. So let's put a bow on the DLCs. We've talked a lot about the past and like why we thought it would be appropriate to have you on and sort of what you could, add to, I guess, the canon or whatever of all the things people talk about in Lorcana. Is there anything else you want to say about DLCs? Put a bow on the whole thing?
Yeah, so every single judge that you were encountering at a DLC had to qualify. They had to take a test, pass a test. So I think it would be really fun if you guys, who have had quite a few opinions on judges, take that test, which has so far never been publicized. Amazingly, it didn't leak, which is pretty cool. I have that test here ready for you to take. So I think it would be great if we took a short break, and then if you're willing, we'll put you through the judge test.
Yeah, let's do it. I just want to put this out there. I have never aimed to be a judge, and I have always respected the position very highly. And yeah, we'll see how I do.
I'm about to get the highest score they've ever recorded on this thing. I'm about to ace the judge exam. Watch it.